All right. Welcome everyone to this Antrea community meeting. Tonight or today, as far as I know, we have 3 topics on the agenda. Feel free to tell me if you would like to add one new topic. I think we're going to start with a quick update on the Antrea 1.11.1 release and the important bug fixes that went into that release. After that, I'm gonna give a quick update on the Antrea UI subproject. That's only gonna take like a few minutes. And finally, I also have like a third topic, which is I want to present a new sync, a new exporter that I'm planning to add to the flow aggregator based on some user upstream user request. So that's about it. Lan and Chan, do you mind starting with 1.11.1 upgrade? Release, sorry.
Okay, I could give a quick update first. Let me share my screen. Yeah, I just want to give a quick update that after the release of 1.11.0, we identified a few critical bugs, and we have released this new patch release to include the critical bug fixes. The first one is that we found that in all previous releases, the Antrea proxy had some defects to support some update case. For example, when sticky max age seconds attribute of a service is updated, or when the internal traffic policy is updated, the Antrea proxy doesn't reflect the changes to data plane overflows correctly. And this has been fixed along with little refactoring in Antrea proxy code, and is backported to this release. I'm trying to backport to 1.10 as well, but I made some difficult. I find it's a little difficult to backport the code chain because it also includes some refactoring, and it's kind of have some dependencies on other changes that are only included in 1.11. So it's a little difficult to backport to earlier releases. Let me know if you have concern that we only fix this update case in the latest patch release, a minor release. And the second critical fix is the endpoint slice API available check. This is a bug in 1.11 only. It was caused by a last-minute commit to the last minor release, and because of typo and how fixed it and backported to this release. The consequence of the bug is that even we have graduated endpoint slice feature to beta and make it enabled by default, it will always fall back to the endpoints API, even the endpoint slice API is available. Yeah. But there should be no impact to functionalities except for those have a strong dependency on endpoint slice API. And the last one is Antrea is a risk condition in Antrea agent that when a group, when a pod could join multiple groups. I think if anyone is more familiar with this bug, please correct me. That there is a risk condition that could make the whole Antrea agent process crash because the risk. And we have fixed it by avoiding by making the operations thread safe and in a third-party library and bump up to the latest version of the third-party library. Yeah, that's all about the latest release. Thank you.
Thanks for the update, Chen, and thanks for the the fixes to the proxy Antrea proxy code. I know you did a lot of refactoring to make the update case more robust.
Thank you.
Any question from anyone on this release or backporting of the fixes? All right, in that case, thanks again, Chen, and I'll move on to the second topic, which is I'm gonna give a quick update on the Antrea UI v0.1 release, the first release. So let me open my my slide here. I have a one-slide presentation. And I'm going to share my screen. No, it's not this one. Oh, here we go. All right, hopefully you can see that slide. Sorry for the delay. So I just wanted to give a quick update and tell everyone that the initial target features, which is essentially kind of like feature parity with the old Octane plugin, have been implemented. So essentially, the UI consists of a summary page, which displays information about the Antrea components. So using the Antrea agent info and Antrea controller info custom resources. And there is a page to run traceflow requests. So since the first presentation I did on the Antrea UI, I've added support for live traffic trace flow. So the UI now supports both regular trace flows and live traffic trace flows. And I added whichever features were missing for trace flow. In addition to that, there is support for accessing the UI over HTTPS and basic authentication using an admin password. I've added a decent amount of unit tests, both for the Golang backend and for the React frontend. And by the way, I wanted to thank Chan and Chu for the reviews they did of all the pull requests for the Antrea UI. There is also an Helm chart now to install Antrea, and that's actually the only installation mechanism at the moment for the Antrea UI. So it requires Helm, and that's because it kind of like depends on some Helm templating functions to generate dynamic data in the YAML manifest. And so we can revisit that decision later, but at the moment only Helm is supported for installation. We've also added the first external contribution to Antrea UI for someone that was from someone that was a first-time contributor to the Antrea project. So I think it's pretty cool, and I think that actually adding kind of like a front-end component to Antrea in that case could like help attract new contributors, because there are developers out there which kind of like specialized more on front-end development. So I think that's pretty pretty good. I merged one PR today, and that's actually the last PR I wanted to merge before the first release of the UI. I wanted to make that release sooner rather than later, so I'm going to make it this week because until there is an actual release of the UI, it's not really convenient to install the UI using Elm. You would need to basically, for example, clone the repo and install it locally because Elm release is not going to be published to the Elm repository for Antrea until we do an actual release in GitHub. So I'm going to make that release this week, and then it will be possible for users to install the Antrea UI easily using Elm. And once this is done, it will also be possible to officially deprecate the Octane plugin in Antrea. I actually have a PR which is ready to be merged. It's been approved, but I was waiting for an actual Antrea UI release before I move forward with the deprecation process. Once this PR is merged, the Octane plugin will be officially deprecated in Antrea 1.12. And then after 1.12, post 1.12, we will remove the Octane plugin code, and it will be completely removed for the 1.13 timeframe. I think in that case, having a single minor release is enough of a warning and ends up to people, because I assume most Octane users are kind of like familiar with the fact that Octane has not been maintained and is no longer maintained and has not been maintained for, I think, 1 year. And yeah, that's about it for the update. If you haven't tried the UI, please give it a try. It's very easy to install, or wait for the release, and then it will be even easier to install, of course. And share your feedback. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to future contributions. I think we can turn this into a great feature for users. We can have new UI web pages for entry APIs. I think Janjun mentioned group membership in the past for network policies. This is something we could have pages for, have displays for. I think we could incorporate some elements for flow visualization and even metrics visualization, and have everything in one place. So I think we can turn this into something very nice. That's all for the update. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have. All right. No questions, so let me stop sharing this. And sorry, guys, everyone is stuck with me tonight because I'm going to move to the last topic that we have on the agenda, and it's also me presenting. And I'm seeing a comment from Chad. Yeah, thanks, Chan, for this comment, and thank you for the very thorough reviews that you did for the UI, especially the first PR, which was pretty massive. And yeah, let me share my screen one more time for the other presentation that I have. It's saying my screen sharing is paused. Let me, oh, I see. Okay, hopefully you see the new PowerPoint here. And I want to talk about a new sync, I guess we call it exporter in the context of the flow aggregator that I've been working on for the flow aggregator. It's called the log exporter. And essentially the idea is to enable the flow aggregator to support logging flows directly to a local file as an alternative to exporting those flows either to ClickHouse or AWS S3, which is something we support today as well. So a quick recap. I know that some of you work on the flow aggregator or have worked on the flow aggregator, or use the flow aggregator. So you probably are familiar with that architecture already, but essentially we have a component in the Antrea agent, which is called the flow exporter. That component periodically exports connection data, and that data is collected from Contract on Linux to a centralized entity, which is a flow aggregator, which runs as a one pod deployment locally on each Antrea cluster, if you have enabled this feature, of course. The export is done over using IPFix messages over TCP. So the idea is we don't drop or miss any connections, because we want that system to be aware of every connection that's going through the Antrea network. So we export that data to the flow aggregator. It's collected by essentially part of the flow aggregator, which we refer to as a collector, obviously. And after we do that collection and we do some, what I'm going to call information enhancement, where we add some missing data to the IPFix records we get from the agents, we're going to export the aggregated records to a sink using one of the exporters that we support. And at the moment, we support 3 different exporters. We have what I want to call the legacy IPFix exporter, which is able to export aggregated flow data using IPFix to an external collector. We have the ClickHouse exporter, which is really used by the SIA subproject today. And so that exporter uses ClickHouse Golang drivers to export flow data into a ClickHouse database. And finally, the most recent addition is the S3 exporter, which supports uploading the flow records as CSV files, to a S3 bucket of your choice. So those are the 3 exporters we support today. And I'm planning to add a 4th exporter, which implements the same exporter interface and is called a log exporter, and can write individual aggregated flows to a local file currently in CSV format. And it's very easy to consume those flows from this file. Obviously, the file is local to the pod file system, but it can be like volume mounts from the node on which the aggregator is running, or it can be Kubernetes persistent volume, for example. I think before I move further, and the next slide is about explaining why this log exporter, why I think it is a good idea. Is there any question on this slide? Right, I think most folks in the meeting should be kind of like familiar with that architecture already. So why did I want to introduce this new exporter? So it started from an issue that was opened, I think, a year ago, or maybe even more, by an Antrea user. And that user was saying that they find like a lot of value in the local audit logs that we support. So if you're not familiar with that, it's logs that each agent can write to the local file system of that agent's pod with information about allowed connections or denied connections or rejected connections. And this is enabled on a per network policy basis by either adding an annotation for Kubernetes network policies or by turning on a flag for Antrea native policies. That flag is part of the policy specification. And so they were using those audit logs, but there are a couple, I want to say quote unquote issues. Of course, it's by design, but there are a couple of issues for users with those local audit logs. And the major one, which that user was complaining about in the issue, is that they are missing information. And in particular, they are missing pod names for the source and the destination. So for one of those pods, it's kind of like it would be easy for us to add the pod namespace and name. That would be the pod to which the local pod to which the network policy is applied to. But it's not easy or convenient or realistic, I want to say, for the agent to get information about the other side of the connection. So for an ingress policy rule, for example, that would be the source of the connection, the source pod and namespace, because that would mean that each agent would need to get that information from the Kubernetes API servers and cache it locally. And I think by design, we don't want each agent to have knowledge about all the pods in the Kubernetes cluster, because that can represent a lot of information for a large cluster, potentially put some stress on the Kubernetes control plane if a lot of pods are created and deleted. So we kind of like want to avoid that. So that's the main issue. I think the second issue would be that by nature, those logs are also local to a node, to a specific agent. And if you want to collect them in a central place to be easily consumed, you need to deploy additional software to do that. And we have a cookbook, which is part of the Antrea documentation, that describes how to deploy FluentD as a daemon set in the cluster to export all those logs to a central collector. And the point I want to make is that while we can improve those local audit logs, we could, for example, add a pod namespace and pod name for the apply to pod, for the local pod, which is part of that connection. I think that the bottom line is that we should avoid duplicating work and functionality with what we've done in the flow aggregator and in Thea. And so the flow aggregator should already be processing all the flows, should be aware of all the flows. Of course, there's a little bit of a delay because I think it depends on the timeouts you configure in the flow exporter and the aggregator. But typically, we can say that there is potentially a 60-second delay between the connection being initiated and flow aggregator becoming aware of that connection. Sorry, what was I thinking about? Yeah, so there is a delay, but the flow aggregator already has all the flows and all the information, because after it performs the aggregation process, all the flows have been enhanced with all the necessary information. So pod name, spaces, pod names for both sides of the connection, network policy info, we have the network policy name, the role, the network policy action performed by that role. So we have a lot of information. And so all that information is already in the flow aggregator. Obviously, the flow aggregator can already export that information to Thea. As we've seen before, we have 3 different exporters, but some users may be reluctant to deploy Thea with a ClickHouse exporter and all the Thea software just to get access to those audit logs. And so my solution is to add a new exporter to the flow aggregator, which is going to leverage everything we've built inside the flow aggregator. And I would say that the flow aggregator is pretty easy to deploy at this stage, and maybe lightweight, at least in some cases. And we can rely on the flow aggregator to log all the flows to the pods file system. So it's just an alternative to adding those flows to a ClickHouse database, for example. And obviously, there are some scaling considerations here in terms in case a very large number of flows have to be logged, and I can come back to that later.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, please.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
thanks.
can go first.
I have a question about the audit logs. So if a connection is blocked, it will appear in the audit logs, but if that connection is blocked, will it appear in the flow aggregator in data?
Yes, with the same caveat here that for those connections, the information, if I recall correctly, comes from OVS directly using a packet in message. And so we have rate limiting in place to avoid overloading the agent with too much information. If someone keeps trying to send UDP packets, for example, which match a network policy drop rule. So if someone sends a UDP stream, right, every packet in that stream is gonna eat the connection and the network policy rule, and to avoid sending too many packet in messages to the agent and increasing CPU usage, we have a rate limiting in place, and I think it's 100 packets per second. So if we, or 200, and if we exceed that rate, we will drop that packet, and the information in that case will not be part of the audit logs and will not be seen by the flow aggregator.
Got it. Thanks.
But both things see the same thing. So if there is a flow that is seen by the audit logs, I think it should also be seen by the flow aggregator. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually had this. My one of my questions was the same as Zhengzhen's one. Could you remind me how we collect the flows we export from Antrea agent? Is it periodical, or it is triggered by the packet events too?
So for established connections, the main mechanism is we do polling of the contract table. And I've been thinking about for a long time about potentially moving to event-driven contract. But for now, every minute we poll contract and we get a full list of connections in the Antrea NAT zone, I think. But so if someone is more familiar with that aspect, they can correct me.
If we do it every minute, could a session finish? A session is terminated before two detection. For example, a short TCP connection, could it be still detected by the flow exporter?
I would have to check if it's every minute. I think we assume that the time wait configuration is larger than the poll interval, if that makes sense. And then that the connection is going to show in contract for that duration. At least that's for TCP. My understanding is that we don't miss connections unless it's possible to tweak the kernel parameters, I think, to have a small time wait period. I would need to check that.
Then for the blocked connection, I thought we didn't even commit.
Yeah, so for block connection, it's packet in messages, I think.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
Thank you. And since there's a delay, do you think it could happen that if we just have port IP in the exported flow, and then we collect the port name information later in flow aggregator, the port IP and the port name mapping has already changed, which could cause wrong flow information?
So it's too bad there's no one from the, I don't think there's anyone from that team here, but so for the applied to pod, that information is populated by the flow exporter. So hopefully it should be current, but I think even there, because there is a polling delay, it's possible that it's outdated. I don't remember if we compare the pod creation timestamp with the flow start time when we map the IP address to the pod name. Maybe that's something worth investigating, if we could do that, to make sure that we don't map it to the wrong pod.
Yeah.
But even then, without time synchronization, I don't know how accurate it would be, because Well, I guess it's a wider problem, but assuming the nodes have synchronized times, and I guess we could check the pod creation time to make sure we have the right pod.
Yeah, that sounds a good approach. Okay. Thank you.
It's a bit orthogonal questions, right? Those are more like wider topics about the flow aggregator implementation, but yeah, they are worth looking into. I think I'll check with Anlan and Yongming tomorrow and revisit those questions with them, if that sounds good.
Yeah, I thought that if it's only for flow with it's only for flow visualization, I thought it might be okay, but if this is going to be used for audit logging, it may have higher requirement on the correctness of the information.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we would have this problem with any process, any central process that that would collect those flows and do the mapping between IP and pod names, or because there could always be a delay in theory. So yeah, I think we have to be careful about that. But I think that problem would apply kind of like regardless of how we do the mapping.
Okay.
Of course, the delay can be shorter or longer, but
yeah.
What's the retention policy?
Let me get into that in the next slide, I think. Or the slide after that. So this is a PR for the log exporter. It's about 1,000 lines of code, including unit tests. And for log file management, we use the same library as for audit logs, which is called Lumberjack. Writes are buffered for efficiency with, I think, a max latency of 5 seconds before we write to the file. So kind of like not a big deal given the existing latency between the flow exporter and the flow aggregator. Currently, we only support the CSV format. And in the configuration, it's possible to filter flows to reduce the volume of logs. And this is a screenshot of the current flow exporter configuration. So to kind of like answer Elton's question here, those parameters, max size, max backups, max age, and compress, those are directly taken from the log management libraries that we use, and they let you configure exactly the volume of logs that you want to keep around. So essentially, it lets you configure log rotation. By default, a log file is 100 megabytes. We're gonna have at most 3 of them, and that's it. And there is a filtering parameter, which is filters, which can let you decide which flows you want to keep. So by default, all flows are logged, even when they're not, even when there is no network policy applied to them. And so you can do different filtering options to log different flows. For example, you can log only unprotected flows, or you can log only flows which are only connections which are denied. And this is an example of a log file. I guess I should have included the column names here. But from memory, it is time at which the connection started, time at which it ended. We have the source IP, destination IP, then it's port numbers. For the first two, it's ICMP, so those port numbers are 0. Then the protocol, and then we have what is that? That's a source source pod with the source node. After that, we have the destination. For the first flows here, it's to an external IP address, so there is no information about the destination pod. And then we have like information about policies. If you look at the third line, you can see that there is a Antrea cluster network policy which applies to that traffic, and you have the name of the policy and the name of the rule. And there is a pretty print option, which I didn't discuss in the configuration, which takes care of doing things like translating the protocol number into a protocol name. And I think, yeah, I have some possible future work here. But there were some very good questions tonight, and so I want to follow up on those, especially the last one from Chen. I want to make sure that the mapping we do between IP address and pod name information is correct, and that if we cannot get the right mapping, obviously we should still log the flow, but just with IP addresses. And I think that should satisfy requirements for audit logging, because basically with local audit logs today, what we have is the IP address. So ideally, we should be able to map to pod namespace and names correctly. And if we cannot decide that this is the correct mapping, then we should not try to add a wrong names to the logs. So I'll follow up on those questions. All right, guys, everyone, any other questions on the exporter, the configuration options, or the example I showed here? Or any general concerns about this feature?
So a user can configure all the 4 exporters at the same time?
Yes.
Okay.
It may increase, it will increase CPU usage, of course, but yeah, they can all run at the same time, or any combination of those exporters. All right, let me stop sharing. If there are no further questions on this, and that's all for this topic, and we can open the floor for open discussion. So if anyone has anything they want to bring up, any topic, any question on Antrea, anything, now is a good time to do so. All right, looks like there is nothing. So everybody is getting 20 minutes of their time back today. Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks for your attention and for your questions, and I'll see everyone in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.